Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. How many of you remember where you were on January 15th, 2009? It was a Thursday, if that helps you, by the way. For most of us, it was a very unmemorable day, probably full of your tedious routine. But that morning, Chelsea Sullenberger thought that he too would be joining the masses of monotony of daily life as he stepped into the cockpit of his U.S. Airways Flight 1549, traveling from New York to Charlotte. You may have heard this story in the news, but I recount it for you. He'd flown this simple route many times before, and he was not anticipating what was about to happen. 2 minutes after his plane took off, they hit a flock of geese. One engine went out. And then a few moments later, a second engine went out. He had 150 people in the plane with him. His plane was worth roughly $100 million. Sullenberger, known as Sully, affectionately by those who loved him, was presented with a dilemma requiring quick decision-making and aggressive follow-through. So with both his engines disabled, he didn't have the luxury of weighing the pros and cons, making a cute little chart, or even checking Google Maps to see where he should go. There was an airport in front of him and an airport behind him. Air traffic control was desperately trying to clear space for him at this airport. And finally, after a moment of silence on the radio, the captain of this plane declared his decision. We're going to land in the river. The air traffic controller thought he had misheard, so he asked him to repeat, but the same answer came through. We're going to land in the Hudson River. In those brief seconds of silence, Sully decided he didn't have enough momentum to turn around and go back to the airport he took off from, nor to make it to the airport in front of him in New Jersey. So he decided the safest option was to land in the river. Now, 4 minutes into this flight, his plane safely landed in the river, as safe as it could be. Sully was a hero. 5 people were injured, and that's about it. Out of 150 people on this plane, 5 people were injured. However, though Sully was a hero, right after this, he was dragged before a safety board tribunal to decide whether or not what he'd done was really the right decision. So it was a bunch of stuffy men in suits sitting behind a board evaluating his snap decision in the air. There's a movie in 2016 released, it was called Sully, and it actually details this investigation into what he did. And in the end, he was vindicated. It turns out that he made a decision better than the computer simulation could have in those moments, and made the right decision and saved everyone's life on board that plane. And I share this because I think the reason Sully was able to make that decision and stick with it was because of his years and years of experience flying a plane. That decision came naturally to him because of all of the work that he'd already put in. And I say this because I think it's a perfect illustration of the effect of character on our lives. So I want you to ponder this as we start this morning. What is character? What is personal character? What do we mean when we say somebody has good character? Somebody has bad character? Can we change our character? Are we born with it? Are we stuck with it? Do we have control over it at all? As we ask these questions, we're stepping into a complex web of interrelated terms and concepts. There's a lot of discussion to be had concerning the distinctions between character and behavior. How do ethics fit in? Where's morality? What does virtue have to do with it? So it's actually quite a big thing I'm asking you to ponder this morning. But over the next few weeks, we're going to enter into this discussion and take it in like little bite sizes so that at the end of it, we'll all be well versed in what is character, what does it mean, how does it affect our lives. So if you've noticed, this is probably going to be a bit of a hard concept. I was just camping a few weekends ago, and if you've ever been camping or even just left your door open at home and a mosquito gets into your house and it's flying around and you're snapping at it, trying to grab it. Have you experienced this before? This is what this is going to be like. You're going to be grasping at these concepts, trying to figure out what is character, I don't get it, but then finally you're going to grasp that juicy, bloody mosquito. And when you do, you'll know. Guts will be everywhere. But you'll grasp character. That's my hope. To make it a little easier, this discussion is going to focus on how it applies specifically to something that's very near and dear to each of us. That's our finances. So more specifically, we're going to look in the book of Proverbs and identify important virtues and character traits that are prominently and consistently connected to money and wealth management. To sum it up, this series is going to explore how does my character impact my wealth. Now, when I say wealth, I don't mean your income level. I don't mean your line 150 on your tax return. I mean everything that you have that has monetary value to it. This is how the Hebrews looked at wealth. And since we're going to Proverbs, we need to put on our Hebrew mindset. They thought of wealth as the land that you owned, the servants in your household, the commodities that you had, whether it was grain or wine or oil. They have this very holistic view of wealth. And so that's what we're going to step into today. Everything that you have that is of value, your house, your car, your savings, your investments, all of this grouped together as wealth. And not just wealthy, meaning more wealthy than other people, but the value, the total value that you guys have. Everything that we have, almost everything that we have, has some kind of a dollar value to it. Kijiji makes sure of that. So the question I want you guys to be pondering is, how does your character impact how you accumulate these things and what to do with them when you have them? So to answer that, I want to first define character. And I'm leaning heavily on a biblical scholar named N.T. Wright and his book, After You Believe, to define this. It's an incredible book. I recommend it, honestly, if you haven't read it. But he says that character is behavior that's become second nature. Second nature, not natural. So there's an important difference between natural behavior and second nature behavior. Behavior that's natural didn't take any effort at all to acquire it. How many people here, with a show of hands, think you're an extrovert? Just put your hand up. All right, that's why we have a quiet crowd. How many of you think you're introverts? Yeah, that is like significantly imbalanced. Those two characteristics, those are going to impact your behavior. You're more likely to behave a certain way if you're an extrovert. You're more likely to behave a certain way if you're an introvert. But that's natural behavior. That's not something that you've trained yourself to do. That's how you naturally act. Second, a behavior that is second nature has to be repeatedly attempted, time and time again. You have to fall down. You have to scrape your knee. You have to fail in order to succeed in second nature behavior. This is what Solomon, the king of Israel, meant when he said, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it." So just like Sully's years and years of sitting behind the controls of an airplane, culminating in this moment of his snap decision to save the lives of 150 passengers, our character development may not be as critical as his was, but is still nonetheless important. And still takes years and years of dedication to achieve. Some of you might be thinking, aren't we saved by faith instead of our works? You've heard this before, hopefully preached from the pulpit, saved by faith instead of works. So why should we put all this effort into perfecting our character when our salvation's already secured? Isn't this a little legalistic? Isn't this the opposite of the gospel? So let me answer that by invoking these painful memories of your junior high math. When writing fractions, remember fractions, you are supposed to reduce them to their simplest fraction, right? Meaning 2 over 4 should always be written as 1 over 2. So when my fiance makes her scrumptious, amazing waffles, she doesn't put in 2/4 of a cup of milk. She puts in 1/2 of a cup of milk. Just sounds weird to say it the other way. Is this coming back? Getting like your fractions? What would 12/16 be reduced to? Somebody shout it out. Yes. What about if Kathy needs 128/256 cups of milk? 1/2. We have some engineers in the crowd. Theologically, from a Christian perspective, you can reduce all of human history to one simple phrase. God is rehabilitating creation. Zach shared the gospel with us earlier in communion, that we are broken, that we need saving. And that is all of human history reduced to one simple statement. God is rehabilitating creation. Creation needs to be rehabilitated because it was created harmonious and complete. The Hebrews use the word shalom for it. Everything had its place. It fit perfectly together. But it was thrown into chaos through sin. Romans 8 says that creation actually goes through labor pains, literally pregnancy pains, as it waits and it anticipates the completion of this rehab. That's where we come in. The main work of this rehabilitation is focused on how we treat each other, how we treat ourselves, how we treat creation around us, and how we treat God. And creation can't be restored, can't be rehabilitated until humanity and what it means to be a human is restored. Rehabilitation in its very nature is voluntary. How many of you watched The Office TV series? I had a clip I wanted to show you, but there's copyright issues and all these problems. But in this show, there is a boss who is just way over-involved in the life of his employees. Just awkward, cringe-worthy moments. And one of those happens at a company Christmas party, where Michael Scott has gone out and bought way too much alcohol for his office. And one lady's drinking problems have emerged. She has a problem with alcohol. She doesn't necessarily see it. So the boss stages an intervention where everybody can share how her drinking has affected them. Unfortunately, it's a lot of positive things in the ways that it's affected them. Like she drank too much and she couldn't go to a movie, so she gave those movie tickets to somebody else. So it kind of backfired on this boss. But this culminates in the boss convincing her to go for a trip to one of the local bars. And on the way to the bar, Meredith, knowing where all the bars are in town, says, where are we going? This bar, that bar, this bar? Oh, it's a new bar. Oh, it must be like a really new bar. I've never heard of it. And he pulls into the rehab center parking lot. Now, she's been drinking a little bit, but she still is able to recognize where she is. And so the next scene is this epic chase as she's running in high heels, stumbling in high heels through the parking lot as her boss chases her down to drag her kicking and screaming into the rehab center. And he says, I have an alcoholic. Where can I deposit it? Does rehab work that way? Just from what you know of rehabilitation, it does not work like that. So if God is rehabilitating creation, he is not going to drag us kicking and screaming into this program. He wants, he needs our voluntary consent. And we give that through our character development. We've spent our entire lives developing these character traits, habits, and core beliefs that are completely contrary to shalom harmony that God has in store for us. We can't hold on to this old character and at the same time try to embrace this new nature, this second nature, and embrace the harmony that God has. So by holding on to one, you consequentially have to let go of the other. This means that as we seek to courageously transform our character, I say courageously because to honestly look at yourself, to think, what is my character? And to seek to change it, you need courage, boldness, kahunas. This isn't something to be undertaken by the faint at heart. Stay at home. if you're not willing to confront really who you are and to work with God in this rehabilitation. I was sharing some of these thoughts with Kathy this week, just about character. What is character? Because I too find it an ambiguous concept. And so she thoughtfully says, well, what character do you have? And really caught off guard by that. I thought to myself, well, I have patience. I'm a patient person. And Kathy just gives me that look. And anyone, if you have somebody who's close to you and you've shared something like this, you'll totally be able to picture this look. She's like, I've driven with you before. You don't have patience. And I thought about that for a minute, and I realized I actually think over the last few years I've changed, and patience is no longer a second nature behavior for me. I had it, and it's now gone. And I thought of myself as a patient person, but it was this call out that made me realize I do need to work on that a little more. What is your character? It's a hard question to ask. And like I said, it takes courage to honestly look at yourself in the mirror. But what is your character? What second nature behaviors do you have right now that you've developed over time, good or bad, positive, negative, healthy, unhealthy, because we have all of those? What's your character? Are you willing to ask somebody who's really close to you what they think your character is? Very insightful move. Just be prepared for what's coming. The good news. So here's the good news. Scripture's pretty clear that we indeed can change our character. We can develop these character traits that make us more like Jesus Christ. So that's why we're going to be mining the book of Proverbs over the next few weeks, looking for little bits of wisdom that we can take and use to transform our own personal character. And so the passages that we're going to look at this morning all promote the same virtue. I'm going to talk more about virtue later down in another week, but right now just understand that it's a moral idea that's very important. And Proverbs are meant to be internalized through and thought with thoughtful reflection. It's impactful. So I want you to look at these and write them down. Or not them down. I want you to write down one of them which is impactful to you. You don't have to write it down now, but you take your phone, take a picture, whatever you want to do. Take these Proverbs and think on them throughout the week. Proverbs 3:9, starting on stage right, going the other way. Honor the Lord with your wealth and the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will be bursting with wine. Proverbs 22, verse 4. The reward for humility and the fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. Proverbs 30, verses 7 to 9. 2 things I ask of you, deny them not from me before I die. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. Which of these texts stands out most for you? I want you to pick one right now while we're sitting here. Proverbs aren't meant to be applicable to absolutely every situation. They're not a formula that you could take with you in life, but they're something that you sit on, you think on, you internalize, and then you take and apply as you go through life. Evidently, many of these were written as kind of a way to train kids as they were growing up. But luckily, we can still change our character, so if we missed the boat when we were a kid, we can still take advantage of this now. But in all of these, there seems to be this connection between abundance and a right relationship with God. It's a sense of honor the Lord with your wealth, and you'll have abundance. This plays off of the covenant relationship that Zach was talking about earlier. But as Israel was leaving Egypt, Moses split them into 3 different groups. You can read this at the end of Deuteronomy. And he had one group stand on a mountain over here, he had a second group stand on a mountain over here, and a third group walk right down the middle. As they did that, the group on this mountain yelled blessings that were going to come to Israel if they kept their relationship with God pure, if they followed him and obeyed his commandments. And the group on this side yelled curses that would come to Israel if they failed in their covenant responsibility, if they didn't stick to their agreement with God. That's the concept, that's the context of these passages, especially Proverbs 3, 9 to 10. At first it seems, give money to God and you will be rich. But the truth is a lot deeper than that. Maintain your relationship with God and you will have plenty, abundance, more than you need. But out of these Proverbs, we come to this general idea of reverence and devotion. And these are the virtues that I want you to be thinking about this week. Reverence for God, meaning a deep respect, almost awe, is not enough on its own. That reverence has to move us to devotion, to loyalty, to love for God. My reverence and my devotion for my fiancée, Kathy, are deep. I really respect her and I love her, but they are not near the level of reverence and devotion that is owed to God. It's just a fact. I'm devoted to her, but were there ever to be a conflict, I got to choose God, and she knows that, and I expect the same from her. This is part of devotion. But I want to quickly, just as I end this morning, because we've talked a lot already about various things, I want to have a few thoughts on how to cultivate reverence and devotion, and even how those affect our finances. Because I think they're very beautifully wrapped up in this simple practice that has been in the church for centuries. I've talked about it before, Peter's talked about it before, and I honestly think that this is the key to a thriving spiritual life, and it is the practice of the presence of God. This constant awareness that God is with you, that God is around you, that God is open to you, that he wants to talk to you, that he wants to hear from you, that he also wants to speak to you, that God is involved in the arena of your mind. And you're not going crazy, but that God honestly speaks to us through the medium of our thoughts when we sit down and clear space for him. That we can actually commune with the creator of the universe. I think it's really hard to accept this as we look up at the night sky and we see thousands of stars that are millions of light years away. It's really hard to believe that God, creator of all that, actually cares about us and what happens in our daily mundane lives. But Jesus said this really interesting thing. God knows how many hairs are on your head. It's the most useless piece of trivia anybody could have. Why do I care how many hairs are on my head? I'm losing them every day. But God cares enough to know. So I encourage you, as you go through your financial decisions for the next week, the next month, the next year, bring in this practice of the presence of God. It's something as simple as, I just got my credit card bill. Let me talk to God. Bring God into that moment when you're dealing with your finances. And the beauty of the practice of the presence of God is it doesn't have to be this like crazy special set apart time. It can literally be you're standing in the entranceway of your house. You look at that credit card limit, get a little anxiety, and you talk to God about it. I'm convinced that the more time we spend with God, the more his character rubs off on us. I have a brother who, were you to meet him, and if you were far enough away, you would not be able to tell the difference between the two of us. We're not twins. We look fairly similar, but it's our mannerisms that are the same. The way that we hold ourselves, the slight angle that my feet are at right now, where our shoulders are, we just emulate each other. We copy each other. We've spent so much time with each other that these things have rubbed off on us. This is the practice of the presence of God and the effect that it has in our lives as we spend time with God, especially when it comes to our money decisions, buying things, where are we investing, what are we doing for work, how are we engaging in our employer-employee relationship. As we invite God into those, he rubs off on us, and you will not be the same. I challenge you to try that this week. Whenever you think of money, here's a simple challenge. Whenever you think of money, have a little prayer to God. about that money. And I want to see what happens. I would love to hear some feedback, honestly, from this. Whenever you think of money, whenever you have a money decision, immediately send up a prayer to God. God, give me wisdom. God, this is what's happening. What do I do? God, I'm worried about this. God, I'm happy about this. And start this practice. Because, just like Sully Sullenberger, as you constantly do this, it'll become second nature, and you will see the effects in your life. I guarantee that. That's like the Jamie stamp of approval. Combine the practice of the presence of God with your financial decisions, and see if your vats do not overflow with wine and your storehouses aren't overly abundant. That imagery means nothing to us now. But go and see if you really have anything that you're lacking once you start to invite God into this area of your life. Would you guys pray with me? And because I think this is something that we need God's help in as we go out this week.